This presentation is about on-screen editing. Why edit on screen? Well, it can minimize some errors that might occur were you to mark on paper, which is known as copy marking. For example, if you were to mark on paper, the other editors or the author will have to look at the copy marks on the paper and incorporate them into the on-screen word processor, which of course lends opportunities for human error. So editing directly on the screen can minimize such things. It's presumably faster, though no study has really confirmed that. It would seem as though it is. It also is just more consistent. For example, it could be that what you copy mark might look different in certain ways on the paper, but with on-screen editing technologies, it always looks the same. Sometimes copy markings can look different just simply based off of editor's handwriting. And it can also be done efficiently at a distance. In other words, simply email the edited document versus having to send through the postal service or what have you, the document that has the copy markings on it. So there's some reasons why editing on screen can be more popular. Though studies of editors in the workplace have shown that it just basically depends on the task at hand, whether editors prefer to edit on paper versus on screen. I myself, of course, will edit my work on screen, but when I'm dealing with, before actually sending my work to somebody, I tend to print it off and I actually do copy marking. The reason I do that is because I tend to find some things that I missed on screen. So there's also some drawbacks or some disadvantages to editing on screen. We can actually find ourselves overlooking errors. We just miss them just because we tend to skim and scan on screen, as you could probably attest from your own experience. Also, it can strain the eye, makes sense. Also, when you send a changed document to the author, sometimes the tracked changes can be a little messy or overwhelming for the author, maybe posing for them some frustration. So there are three types of on-screen editing that we could discuss. There's what's called automated typographic markup. Basically what you have here is it's essentially like track changes, which you have reviewed by now at this point, where you can see consistently this automated markup that's been created by the word processing technology. So Microsoft track changes. It looks like underlining, it looks like strike-throughs, it also looks like comment bubbles. And so this is it's what we call automated. But there's also manual. So take, for example, any Word document. You could choose instead to do manual changes by highlighting certain words in different colors or changing your font to red or green and then inserting some changes in that way. One of my dissertation advisors liked to mark up my work in that way, while another dissertation advisor liked to do it through automated typographic markup. So I got two different experiences as an author receiving the feedback. I can't say for sure which one I preferred because both provided valuable feedback, but you can sense that automated is easier because I can merely accept the change with the click of a button. And with manual, of course, I have to consider the change and incorporate it and change the font back or get rid of highlighting that I no longer need. But there are disadvantages and advantages to both. It just depends on the author's preferences. One last type of on-screen editing is called electronic overlay markup. So these words seem a little technical, but think about the meaning of that language. It's electronic, so it's obviously on screen, but it's overlay markup, meaning take any image and, for example, a PDF, which is basically an image of a document. And what you can do is use technology like Adobe Reader and use the pen to literally mark up the document, and it's overlaid over the document, so it's just on top of the image of the document. And these on-screen markups can be easily deleted. This is typically how I've done proofreading, because at this point, as I've mentioned before in previous lectures, you're dealing with the proof, which is typically in a PDF. And so in that proofreading component, what I would do is I would highlight or mark up overlay of that PDF. So this is superimposed on the document, and this is yet another way to do on-screen editing. So those are some of the basics of on-screen editing. I recommend to you a book by Jeffrey Hart called Effective On-Screen Editing, which gets into a lot of detail of doing this specifically, especially for Word. But Technical Editing is another textbook that you could consult. It does have a chapter about that. It's by Carolyn Root and Angela Eaton, though it's quite expensive, and I understand that Dr. Eaton is working on a new edition, so time will tell. Now, what I'm about to do is demonstrate for you some of the practical aspects that build off of what you've probably already reviewed about how to do on-screen editing with Microsoft Word. Okay, what I have here is a practice document, which I have linked to if you want to do some practicing, though this is not something you need to turn in. What this is, it gives you some tips, it gives you some exercises about on-screen editing. Now, you've reviewed already through a Linda video how to do some of the technology, but these are some additional insights, which is why I've incorporated it into this lecture. So, first of all, as you already know, to begin track changes, you need to, up in the Home ribbon, select Review, which, as it communicates, is spelling and grammar and all this other stuff, but among which is the Track Changes button, which is found there. Now, depending on whether you're using Mac, this is a Mac, or you're using a PC, it will determine what some of the buttons look like, but essentially it communicates just as well across both types. So to turn on track changes, as you know, you click on this little button, which is a toggle. Now, what you're seeing right now is a certain way of viewing the changes. It's called all markup. And what it's communicating is I'm seeing every possible change that an editor made. Sometimes it's selected simple markup. And what you see is it's trying to get rid of all of that, and the only way to see what was changed is to click on this little red bar here for it to pop out. It could be that there's an author who prefers to see what it looks like if the changes were already accepted, but I typically don't like that, and I'd like to just see everything that's going on with the document, so I select all markup. Now, another component. What you'll see here is that all the changes are being communicated in two ways. Insertions are being communicated through this underline red text, and deletions are being communicated through these comment bubbles on the side. Now, this is perfectly fine, but what I tend to find is that the more changes you make, especially the more comments, the more formatting changes, and the more deletions you make, this row or this column right here can get really full, and these lines that point to where the deletion was can get really complicated. Just imagine 20 comments and deletions and all the different lines pointing to different places, and I've received documents myself as an author in which that's the way the editor chose to show the changes, and it's simply overwhelming and irritating. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and I would like for you to consider in your editing practices. Select markup options, and what you'll see are the different ways that the editing can be displayed. Now go down to balloons, and notice that right now it says show revisions in balloons. Now, I don't really like that. What I like instead is show only comments and formatting in balloons. What you see now is those balloons went away, the side panel no longer appears, and instead deletions are communicated through strike-throughs. I like that a lot better because it's a lot cleaner and easier to see the changes. Now, what we have here is also these little red bars that are telling me where changes are, and that's how you can toggle between simple and all markup. But what they can also cue you as an author and as an editor is that a change was made somewhere in this region, and it can show you where that is. For example, what we have here is a few tips. The first one is be wary of making huge, substantial changes to organization or rewriting sentences or formatting with track changes on. So if you're going to completely rewrite a section or a paragraph or two, you can include track changes, but sometimes it can get confusing, so make a good decision of whether track changes needs to be on at that point. It could be that all you need to do is just say, write the new content that you wanted to edit, then put a comment and say, I rewrote this section here, take a look at it, or whatever. So typically you want to keep track changes on for small copy editing changes. So here's an original sentence. and it's important to consider what they will look like to the writer. Obviously, there's a missing letter here, and proofreaders is being misspelled here, though of course the style guide should determine if that's misspelled or not, but let's say it is. So there's the single character change, where I simply add the R, or cut the little hyphen out of there, though it's not clear that I cut it. It kind of looks like I inserted one, doesn't it? So I typically like to do the word change, literally change the whole word, so that it's very obvious visually to the author that I've made a change. Now, what I'm going to do for now is reject these changes. As you can see, this is how I'm doing it, and you've already reviewed it for yourself. Sometimes, see, I'm right-clicking and it's getting confused because it knows it's misspelled, and it thinks I want to find out how to do the correct spelling, and sometimes that can be frustrating. So one option or tool you could use is the reviewing pane. And as you can see, this panel shows up, and I can see all the changes I made to the document. And so I'm having trouble selecting this to accept it because it thinks I want to find the correct spelling. So I can go over here and I can right-click and accept the change through that viewpoint. And that can be really useful when you come into these difficult things where Word doesn't know what you're trying to accomplish. So, as I mentioned, I rejected the change so I could demonstrate for you a couple of ideas. First of all, here's what I recommend, and it's what Jeffrey Hart recommends as well. Type in what you want the new word to look like, and then select Option on a Mac or Control on a PC, and then select Delete. So I'm going to do on my Mac Option Delete, and what it does is it deletes the word entirely versus pressing delete several times to make it work for the whole word. I find that to be efficient, and the reason I want to put the new word, the one that I want, in front is because Jeffrey Hart recommends this, though I think we could study it through some sort of experiment, that it's easy for the author to see, to make a okay, this is what the editor says it should be, and now I see what was deleted after it. It's some sort of a visual cue that this is the brand new version, and this is the one that I don't want after it. Though either one is really okay, but I recommend going, let's say that was misspelled, though it's not in this demonstration, to make the whole word cross out. Okay, so there's that. That's how I recommend you make those changes. Now, last tip, be wary of spacing by showing the non-printing characters. Sometimes in your editing process you can create new spaces or new carriage returns, that is new paragraphs. And what I have on right now, had it on the whole time, is what's called the non-printing characters. You can toggle in the home panel by that on and off by pressing the paragraph symbol up here, and see how those characters disappear. And when I have them on, and I use it obviously, it was already on with my program, is it shows me where all the spaces are. So let's say, for example, somebody had put unintentionally 2 spaces between each sentence, which is not what we need to do anymore, though maybe you learned that you had to. You can sense with those 2 dots that they have 2 spaces. Another thing you can see is where all the returns are. That's what these paragraph symbols are displaying. Okay, so just as a quick example, you can do this practice on your own. I'll only do a few here. Obviously nuclear is there and it needs to be spelled correctly, and as I recommended, I change the word and then I press Option Delete on a Mac. And here again is an example of power. Obviously, Word knows that that's misspelled, and if you select the recommended spelling, it's going to do the new word after it, which is fine. Just try to be as consistent as you can. One option is to just ignore that spelling tool and type what it should be. One thing that could happen, however, is that if you're going to try to write out an entire word, as I just did, it could be that by accident you misspell it, and then the author's going to go through here and say, okay, yeah, whatever, I accept it. But what they're accepting is a misspelled word, so you have to be careful about how you make those changes, especially when it comes to technical words or something where you've completely misspelled the term and the author just goes and says accept all the changes, and they don't quite pay attention to what you recommended. So these are some more practices for you. I think you can get a sense of it as you try to get a hold of the technology if you've never used it before. One thing though, and this is why the tricky cases are there at the bottom, is that when it comes to changing a lot of the individual characters, so for example, this should have been all done in headline style, where the title of the article in this example is all, each letter is capitalized except for things like prepositions and so forth. It's obviously should be like this, but it makes authors really annoyed if you go in, and obviously it takes more time for you, if you go in and change each of the words. So what I recommend is, because then they have to accept all those changes, is for you to copy and paste that whole thing, if that's what you're going to do, and put it in front of it. Now use your tool that we talked about. You see that period there, so be careful. We don't want to delete that period, we need it, but obviously we want to go change it to the proper capitalization style for the title. But what we're going to run into, or what we're presenting for the author, is just one single, actually two things they have to accept. They can first of all accept the entire change that they wanted to include it, and then they can accept the fact that you wanted to delete that, and it makes it really easy. But notice here's small examples. There's now a space here that I didn't notice, or that wasn't there or shouldn't be there. So you have to keep your eye out for these little issues. So obviously now this could be annoying for the author to try to accept that. So again, there's this tool on the side that can help. In any case, there you have it. There's some practice for you if you want to try it out and get used to the technology. And I hope these tips will be helpful for you.